Hello everybody and welcome to one of our 38 Degrees live streams. My name's Laura, I'm from the 38 Degrees staff team and I'm really delighted to be here with David Davis MP. David is a former Shadow Home Secretary and in his time he has also been Foreign Office Minister and a Cabinet Office Minister, but he's also been a really committed parliamentary campaigner on issues that lots of 38 Degrees members feel really passionately about. Issues around civil liberties, privacy, freedom of speech and freedom of information. So we are here today for a fairly brief, around 30 or 40 minute discussion and Q&A about the government's plans for our personal data and surveillance. It's something that 38 Degrees members have worked a lot with David Davis on before, and today we will have the privilege of getting the inside track. So we'll be talking a bit about what the government plans are and what they will mean for us in our ordinary lives, and David will be giving us some advice about what 38 Degrees members can do to help stop them. So should we kick off with an answer from you, David, about roughly what the government is planning?
Well, this is firstly, I'll start by saying it's an incredibly complicated area, right? And I don't want to oversimplify it. I can make it as simple as I can, but I don't want to oversimplify it. So I've given 38 Degrees a whole load of references that people can go and look up, which hopefully will be online, hot links to things. And if people just want a quick summary of it all, they should go to the Lord's hot link, the Lord's report on it. Now, what do we know about what the government's planning? Well, we don't actually know the full details. They have refused to publish their new bill. The history of it's very simple. We have got something like 200 laws that give the government the power to intercept your data, to collect your data, and so on. What this is about is what's called metadata, not intercept. That is where you are, who you're calling, what number you're calling, who you're speaking to, all that sort of stuff. How long you call, what time. It sounds very mundane. The Home Secretary referred to it as just like your phone bill. It is anything but just like your phone bill. Already, and before we get to the Snoopers Charter plans, they can log where you are. I mean, just to show you, there's an example for me. This is what can be done under the law as it stands. The phone company, I don't know if you can see that, can track where you are at any point in time, and they do. And this is one day out of my life when I was at party conference, and it shows all the places I went to, where I stopped, and so on. And if you're the government and you've got that data and you've got the other data that applies there, you can see who I was meeting. So that's already there. And what the government wants to do is to extend that ability to get to your metadata, to your web accesses, web logs, web mail, social media, voice over internet, gaming, all the other activities you do online or do via the communication. So that's the basic aim. People say, what does it matter? You know, it's not content. Well, actually, you know, if you call up Alcoholics Anonymous or a domestic violence helpline or an AIDS helpline or a pregnancy helpline, it's telling somebody what you're calling about. You know, and it's even more true. Well, that's today, that's already possible. It's even more true if you then extend this to web accesses. Well, you know, the website you're going to pretty much is the content. So there's a whole series of areas where the government wants to extend its power. It's got reasons for it, but it's overreaching enormously. When in 2012 they put the first Snoopers Charter, which we saw off, remember? I mean, 38 Degrees and the rest of us really sort of saw it off. One of the reasons we could see it off was because it was reviewed by a committee of the Commons and the Lords with very powerful people on it. It was chaired by Lord Blencathra, who's an ex-Home Office Minister himself. It had the ex-Cabinet Secretary on, it had the ex-Labour Chief Whip, big powerful people. And they ended up saying, one, to the security services, principally in the Home Office, you haven't made your case. There isn't really, the argument for requiring this has not been made. Secondly, it's very expensive. Thirdly, the powers you're asking for are completely open-ended and are ridiculous. And so go away and rewrite it. Now, they've gone away to rewrite it. They tell us they have rewritten it, but they won't publish it yet. But broadly speaking, what they're looking to do is to extend the sort of coverage they have already to all of the, basically all web access, all web activity. And that's, for most modern people, most people below the age of 40, that's a very significant part of their life. You know, the elderly brigade like me, we don't perhaps spend our lives online, but an awful lot of people's lives are online these days.
That's completely true. So this is the point where I'm going to get my trusty computer out, because loads and loads of 38 Degrees members are asking questions for David on the live stream and on our Facebook page. So I'm going to be scrolling through my screen here to identify some questions to put to you.
Sure.
And there are a few members asking, aren't there some legitimate security concerns? They're thinking of, you know, is there a terrorist risk to Britain today that we could avert with this new information? Is it worth it? Is it not? What's your take on that?
Generally speaking, I mean, look, I used to be on a death list for 8 years. You know, I'm quite conscious of terrorist concerns. You know, and as a minister, I handled a lot. Took through the Secret Intelligence Service bill and so on. One of which authorises some of this stuff. So I'm very cognizant of it. And yes, for counter-terrorist activity, for kidnaps. Now, one of the ways you catch kidnappers is you just look at where the phones are. And if I've been kidnapped, they look at where my phone is. And if you kidnap me, they look at where your phone is, and they've got evidence straight away that, you know, of who's kidnapped me. So, of course, they're very, very important, useful purposes for collecting some of this data. Not all of it, but some of it. And this is true not just in Britain, it's true in every modern country. But every other modern country doesn't do it the way we do it. You see, we collect vast amounts of data. We then allow the agencies, the police, the intelligence agencies, even your local authorities to some extent, to look at it, not on the say-so of a judge, say, but on the say-so of somebody else in the same organisation, somebody who's got the right to approve it. And the approval rates go from, the other way around, the rejection rates, the numbers of times they get turned down, go from 25% in some cases to nearly nothing in others. So clearly it's a very, very variable system. I don't want my information or your information or anybody's information sort of just looked at on the say-so of somebody else in the same organisation. So yes, the information is valuable, some of it, but it should be targeted. If you target what you're looking at, you're much more likely to catch the terrorist, much more likely to catch the paedophile, much more likely to stop the kidnap, much more likely to find the lost person if you're very targeted about it than if you're not. 9/11, 7/7, Lee Rigby, Charlie Hebdo, a large number of these terrorist events, information was there in advance. But there was so much information they couldn't actually find the needle in the haystack. And so actually increasing the size of the haystack doesn't help necessarily. It's about focus. It's about having a better magnet, if you like, to find the needle. And our argument, people like me argue, look, of course you've got to have some of this information, but get a judge to approve it first off. And secondly, make sure you use the information properly. Focus and get the really good high quality information rather than billions of bits of data. On everybody. The NSA has said in terms about it has a program which basically monitors every single telephone in the world, or tries to. It's not entirely successful. It generates so much information. They have said themselves they can't digest it. Well, so yes, it's got its value, but use it properly.
So we've got a really good question here from a 38 Degrees member, which asks: is there a middle ground here? Is there a compromise that you think we should be happy with, or should we aiming to be scrapping all of these new powers altogether?
No, there is a middle ground. No, you don't want to scrap the powers altogether. I mean, nobody in the world does that. You know, I mean, I'll come back in a second to how the other countries deal with it. But nobody in the world has none of these powers. And you know, we do have terrorist threats, we do have criminal threats, and so on. So you have to deal with them. But there is a sort of new consensus developing, actually, which is very interesting. 2 or 3 years ago, if I'd been in a debate with, let's say, the ex-head of GCHQ or the ex-head of MI6 or the ex-head of MI5, they would have said to me a number of things. Firstly, they would have said, Or collecting the data is not an intrusion on your privacy, it's only when we look at it. Well, that's sort of nonsense, actually. If I've got your bank account and I say, well, I'm not going to look at it, you still think your privacy is being intruded on. And also, of course, it's somebody holding the data makes it risky. Somebody else might get at it in an unplanned way. So they started by saying, no, collecting data is not an intrusion in privacy. They now recognise that it is an intrusion on privacy, so they have to be more careful about it. But secondly, and far more importantly, there's growing a belief that actually judicial approval by a judge or approval by somebody overseen by a judge is much better than having a policeman in the office next door, an intelligence agent in the office next door, or even the Home Secretary approving these warrants and approving this access. And as I say, 2 or 3 years ago, that would have been no consensus over that. There's been a number of reports in recent months. The most authoritative, we'll have a hot link on your site too, is by David Anderson. It's called A Question of Trust. He's the inspector of basically the intelligence services, got lots of access, and he's written a fabulous report, 300 odd pages if you really want to spend the time on it. But basically he says judicial approval is the way to go. And there's been a report by RUSI, the Royal United Standards Institute, which was actually initiated by Nick Clegg when he was Deputy Prime Minister. And it has on the panel the David Oman, the ex-head of GQ, John Scarlett, the ex-head of MI6, Jonathan Evans, the ex-head of MI5. And they all agree that judicial approval is the route to go. So there's a prime middle ground. The Labour Party is now beginning to go over to that. The Labour Party's not always been a hero in this, but this time they're beginning to take it on. The government is resisting, and this may well, we may talk later about where we press. The government is resisting this, and this seems to me where the battlefield is, and that's where the good middle ground is.
That's really helpful. So one member has asked a slightly bigger question, which is, do you think this is an attack on our civil rights? Do you think it's that big?
Yeah, oh yes it is, of course it is. When the Edward Snowden stuff all broke, there was uproar in America, there was uproar in Germany, there was uproar in France, there was uproar pretty much everywhere except here. And that's because we're sort of relaxed about all this stuff. Why was there an uproar in America? There's an uproar in America because there's constitutional protection of their civil liberties. Why? Because when they broke away from Britain, when they had their War of Independence, it wasn't just about tax on tea. It was about something called a general warrant. That is, the king, as it were, or the representative of the king would issue a general warrant, so they could search your house, arrest you, with no constraint on it. It's very, very like what we're talking about here. In Germany, of course, they've had the Gestapo, they've had the Stasi. The Stasi would have given their right arm for the information we're talking about, and so they're very sensitive about it. You know, other countries have got constitutional courts. We have sort of bumbled along because basically we haven't had a dictatorial problem. We haven't had a problem with heavy-handed governments and so on. But we shouldn't be careless about it. My generation really had a lucky time in a sense, because to intervene and to intercept and to snoop on me would be quite a big effort 25, 30 years ago, you know, with telephone like landlines rather than mobile phones, no internet and so on. To your generation, you live online to a very large extent, huge amounts of your life are online, and what you don't want to do is give over to government, or for that matter Google. You know, I mean, these arguments apply equally to the big corporates too. You don't want to give over control of the information about your life. It might turn out at some point later, the things you don't want known. You know, it may be just a picture of you a bit drunk at a party. Well, forgive me, no, I won't mean you, but it's somebody in there. There's an example. Let me give you an example. In the States, there's a young lady who had just graduated as a teacher. Taking a 3-year course, I think, at university. And she celebrated by going to a party. And she put on her Facebook page a picture of her wearing a sort of pirate's patch and cap with a pint of beer in her hand with drunken pirate underneath. So what you might think? Her school board deregistered her because they thought this was an inappropriate presentation, as it were, for somebody who wanted to be a teacher, an inappropriate role model. and the courts upheld the deregistration. So her career is gone. We know what Twitter storms are like. We know how damaging one allegation, one piece of information can be. So I think we owe ourselves the right to control our own information, and only when we've done something criminal, or only when we're a legitimate suspect in a criminal investigation of some sort, should the state or indeed anybody else have the absolute right to get at that information. So yes, this goes right to the heart of the liberties we've had. I mean, an Englishman's home is his castle is a very old proverb in Britain, old enough to predate the Scots. And the simple truth is, this is the modern version of it. You don't expect a policeman to walk into your house and look through your papers, or have a look round, or talk to everybody there. You don't expect them to come and be searched. There's a reason for that. It's limiting the power of the state over you, and this is the modern version of it.
I'm sure lots of our minds are now turning to what can we do about this. You're obviously a really established political operator, lots of experience of politics and government. So if anybody has any particular questions about that we'd like to ask David about the things that we can do as 38 Degrees members to help overcome this threat, then please comment on Facebook, comment on the live stream, and we can get those questions to you directly. I guess to start with, one 38 Degrees member has asked, it seems like the government is trying to push this through without too much scrutiny. I know that you've obviously had a legal challenge to some of the government's plans, which has been successful. What's your perception of what the government's trying to do here, and what that means for what we could do together to campaign against it?
The first thing to understand is that this is one of those areas where there are a lot of experts outside government. Tim Berners-Lee, the founder of the internet, opposes this. Ross Anderson, the leading software security professor in the country, opposes this. Major legal figures in the legal establishment oppose it. Ex-legal heads oppose it. Other, rather more privately, other people who've been involved with the agencies in the past are uncomfortable about it. So there are a lot of people out there. And the balance of expertise is not inside government. Some of the people making judgments on this, I wouldn't trust to program an old-fashioned video recorder. So there's a lot of expertise outside. The government, therefore, is very nervous about the way it enters into public debate on this. And you really saw an example of this, and very cruel of me to say it, but I will. An example of this was what they call DRIPA, Data Retention Investigatory Powers Act. This was brought in last year. It was brought in because the European Court struck down some of the basis of the old law. And it was debated in the government for 3 months, inside the walls of government. We didn't know anything about it. It was just being debated between various ministers and so on in government for 3 months. They then came to the House of Commons and said, this is an emergency. We've got to get it through in one day. They then didn't finish implementing it, that's putting in the statutory instruments, the regulations that go with it, for another 6 to 9 months. So this so-called emergency, debated for 3 months, given to us for one day, and then implemented slowly over the next 6 months. It wasn't an emergency at all. So why were they doing that? They're doing that because they didn't really want to have a very major debate about it. They knew they had weak ground. So what happened was Tom Watson, currently running for deputy leader of the, as we speak, for the deputy leader of the Labour Party, Tom Watson and I took him to court. We went to the court, and under what they call judicial review, and the government lost. Very simple argument. And the argument was this: you can collect all this data if you've got very, very close control over how it's allocated, who can look at it, what they can look at, what the warrant looks like, who does a warrant, and because it's ministerial or police or agency authorised, they said that's not good enough. It's got to be judicial. So again, we're coming back to this new consensus. So we've won that. The government's going to appeal it on the 22nd, 23rd of October. I think they'll lose, and we'll be into a public argument about what comes next. So that means we've got the emphasis on our side. We've got the flow of events on our side, and I say this to your members: don't assume that every member of Parliament knows lots more about this than you do. They won't. Many of them will know very little more. They'll know what the House of Commons summary on it, the library summary on it, again, which we'll put online for you, says, but they won't have read the Anderson report, they won't have read the Russo report, they will have taken, like most ordinary members of the public, the government's word at its word. So if you're well informed on it, you know, there's the balance of argument is not with the government on this. The balance of argument is actually against them, hence the new consensus, hence the fact that all those ex-spooks are now saying, yeah, that's the way to go.
That's really good to hear. I think it can often be for a lot of us, me included, that when I write to my MP, I want to really sit down and think about it and get it right. But it sounds like what you're saying is that that's not particularly hard to do because lots of MPs won't be experts on this, won't know any more than us.
You've heard me before say don't write the standardised email, you know, because nothing drives MPs madder than having 100 emails all saying exactly the same thing, you know. But engage with them. You know, this is an area of interest to everybody. It's particularly interesting to the younger generation who are more online anyway. But it is something which, if you, for a colleague of mine was on Any Questions, not Question Time, the radio one, and shortly after all the Edward Snowden revelations, and after I'd had a battle over this before, and a lot of ministers saying, "Oh, well, the public don't care about this," and so I said, "See if you can get Dimbleby to ask his audience." And nearly everybody in it, when he said, "Is this important?" nearly everybody put their hands up. You know, it may not be number one in the batting order, but it's probably number 4 or 5. So if you can persuade your MP that this matters to you, that you've actually taken the time to understand it, and you probably understand it better than he does, that's pretty persuasive.
Are there any other bits of advice that you'd give 38 Degrees members who really want to get their MPs on side? Well, should they set up a meeting? Should they? What points do you think they should attempt to make to their MP? What would you find convincing if you're an MP who didn't know about it?
First thing, let me make a plea for MPs for a start. I mean, I'll do that, but before we start, and that is that they're tight on time always. Okay, so whatever you do, at least respect the fact that they've got, roughly speaking, 80,000 people to look after, and all have got different claims. So bear that in mind when you're doing it. So you know, if there's a dozen of you in the area and you want to talk to your MP, get together and go and see them. Yeah?
That's a great idea.
Just a simple thing, because it also makes it a bit less intimidating. I know some people do find it nerve-wracking going to see an MP, so it makes it a bit less intimidating if there's a few of you. Secondly, get your points well organised before you go and see them. When I used to go on a Today programme a lot, particularly when I was a minister, I had a very complicated issue to play. I'd get myself a postcard and I'd write out the 3 main points I wanted to make, and then I'd write out the 6 counter-arguments, or rather my answers to 6 counter-arguments. And on the other side of the postcard, I'd write out the 10 sort of big facts, you know. And then I put the postcard in my pocket and not look at it, but the very fact of doing it organised my mind. And you know, if you go to an MP with an organised argument, you know, he'll think, "Oh, that's serious." And bear in mind, if he's going to do anything, he's going to lift a bit of your argument to use later. So the more persuasive it is, the better, the more confident it makes him about.
So you could hear your words spoken in Parliament? You
could hear your own words spoken in Parliament. I do it all the time. I steal my constituents' words all the time. But just, you know, bear that in mind. The more powerful the case, the more likely. And bear in mind there's something else about this, just on a much more aggregate level. Again, just in terms of confidence of 38 Degree members. We are now in a position where there's a 12 majority in the House of Commons. This week the government was defeated on Europe, as it turns out, but that won't be where the government's in difficulties, because mostly Europe will be not so controversial. The areas where the government will have to pay attention to the House of Commons is those areas where there is a common agreement between the Labour Party, the Liberal Party, the SNP, basically the opposition parties, and a significant number of Conservatives. Because that's it, the government's lost its majority. All right? And this is one of those areas. Civil liberties, justice, human rights is an area where the government has got to tread very carefully. And it will be the area that will come back time and time again in the next 4 or 5 years as an area where the government has to change its mind. And so your members will have quite a lot of leverage here. And this has got the advantage, the outcome we're playing for as we've said, is that new consensus. It's the judicial approval. Because, you know, if a judge approves it, an independent judge approves it, I really don't mind if my information is looked at. I mean, I'm in the public domain anyway, but I don't mind if they look, because the state's got to do certain things. I just object when it's not properly checked out, when it's not properly approved. Think of this. Not on this sort of stuff, but on intercepts, the Home Secretary signs off, we now know, 2,700 warrants a year. That's roughly 10 every working day, assuming she works every week of the year and doesn't go on holiday. That's an awful lot of warrants. Any one of these warrants would justify cross-questioning the person who brought you for an hour. 10 hours a day? I don't think so. When I announced that on the Radio 4 Today programme, I had a flood of letters about this, a number of them from ex-policemen, saying this can't be done, this is not possible. When I used to do this as an as a speciality, as well, it's my job, and I would go and see a judge. We never got it cleared in less than 40 minutes. Those sorts of things come back. So the people on your side could well be the people in the system as well. So we've got practicality on our side, we've got parliamentary arithmetic broadly on our side. That's always fragile, but we've got that. And you've got an argument which you can make to your MP. This is not a partisan argument, it's not Labour or Tory. It actually goes right to the heart of the fundamentals that make our country the great country it is. It's freedom.
So you're saying that the tipping point could be coming over to our side. That's really positive news.
I think so. Bear in mind the deadline on this stuff is really sort of spring of next year. Yeah. Our court case, if we win the appeals, I think we will, really crystallises in March. So the government's got to move on it as well. There's also a timetable on our side.
Fantastic. So we are about to draw to a close, but we've got a little bit more time for a couple of questions that have been coming in through the live stream, so thank you. Bit of a curveball one here, I hope you're prepared. There's a question from Angela on Facebook, and she's asked, what's the cost of the IT required to implement this? I think she's thinking of some of those particularly big problematic IT projects that seem to have kind of spiralled out of control. Could this be one of them?
Not in those terms, no. I mean, the government is going to have to pay the ISPs, the internet providers, and so on, for doing the work of holding much of the data. It's a lot of data we're talking about here, and bear in mind one of the problems here is if you put a lot of data together, you create what they call in the trade a honeypot. You know, so you've all seen, Sony's been hacked into, and Pentagon's been hacked into, and Microsoft's been hacked into. Pretty much, there's barely a database in the world that hasn't been hacked into, even the very secure ones. So they've got to make this incredibly secure. They've probably got to air gap the system. So it will be expensive, and almost certainly more expensive than the government says, but it won't be a runaway one, but it will be expensive. There is one other bit which is not measured in the costs, actually, but it could be a cost to the country. And that is, the people who are most worried about this are actually the companies themselves. Not just because it'll cost money, because it will, but because it could hit their own reputation. If you are suddenly seen as a sort of state's data gatherer, it becomes a problem. Apple, just launched their whole new range of iPhones yesterday. Apple have made this confidentiality, secrecy of your data a central marketing strategy, right? Now, in fact, they came to see me this week on this subject to talk about it. The simple truth is, at the moment, we are probably the sloppiest country in the world in terms of protections of privacy. It's pretty shocking. Yeah, it's pretty shocking. And that could impact on our attempt to compete in software, hardware provision, service provision, and so on. Indeed, after Snowden, one of the things that happened was there were companies set up in Germany saying your emails won't go outside Germany. Really? So you can see that there's another cost. There's being damaged by the fact that people think, I don't really want to trust that particular legislative structure. So what we're doing in many ways will actually help the British national interest in another way.
Fantastic. So we've got one final question from Richard, who has asked, I guess, a bit of a practical question, which is, if the government gets its way, practically speaking, who will be able to see it? Where will it be kept? And what's going to happen to that data eventually?
Well,
how will somebody tap into the system?
As it stands, if the government gets its way and doesn't give in on the judicial review, then basically it's accessible. They have conceded some things. They have conceded all this nonsense about local authorities being able to get it. Remember, it used to be they were checking up on people, which school your kids went to, whether you were in the right catchment area, whether you'd actually properly sorted your rubbish, all that, which is ridiculous, and intrude on people's privacy for that. So that's gone, at least. But you're still down to police, intelligence agencies, arms government, probably things like the tax authorities, the Financial Services Authority, and so on. Mostly with good reason. I mean, in a sense that they have a reason to want to see some of the information. But at the moment, to give you an idea, under the RIPA arrangements, the Regulated Investigatory Powers Act, the thing that gave the map and things like that, they have 550,000 inquiries a year that they approve. 550,000, enormous numbers, vastly too many. And if we have the new system, it'd be bigger than that, probably over 1 million, I should think. So a very, very large number of public authorities, not private people, looking at you. But the other thing you've got to think about is all that data is going to be sitting there, and you're going to have hackers, you're going to have Russian hackers and Chinese hackers and God knows what else. And people just want to embarrass people, as we've seen with Sony and others, or maybe the North Koreans, who knows. And if the data sits there, eventually it'll get broken into. And so you've got to think about that too. But generally speaking, I don't really have a problem with the government agencies that have the right to sue. I just have a problem with the extent to which they'll do it, the number of people that they'll look at.
Well, it sounds like pretty scary stuff, but I have to say I feel a bit more confident now about our ability to knock these plans over together. So we're drawing to the end of our live stream now, but if you'd like to carry on chatting on Facebook or in the comments, then please do. And well, I think let's watch this space for what we can do together next.
Yeah.
Thank you very much, David. And thank you to everybody for watching. Bye.